Look, Alice, this is going to be a hard choice. But you have only two choices, and you have to choose now. Choose the green pill. Turn off this podcast. Go back to the world as you know it. Don't worry, don't fret. Just exist. Or do whatever it is you're actually doing. Or you can take the yellow pill. And you can follow me down a rabbit hole. And we, together, can find out if you're really awake. In my late teens, the Wachowski brothers, now they're the Wachowski sisters, but for historical accuracy, at that time, the Wachowskis, let's just call them the Wachowskis, they're the Wachowskis, they created 3 films that had such a profound effect on me that I consider those 3 films, even though most people don't like the last 2, to be 3 of my favorite films of all time. It's not because of the action or the dialogue or the cinematography or the special effects. All those things were wonderful. It's because of the ideal, of the notion, of the thought experiment that goes on in my head when I watch those movies. Much like Fight Club. Fight Club to me constantly makes me think, constantly makes me look at things differently. And so it also is on that list of movies for me. But with The Matrix and the movies that follow and the upcoming 4th movie, I was exposed to the notion that the world is not what it seems. That we are merely plugged in. We didn't drop out, tune in. I never can remember that, so that won't be my quote for the day. But instead, we hooked up, plugged in, gave up, became batteries. Now, the original plot was not for us to be batteries. And Boston Dynamic is making some amazing robots right now, so, it stays fresh in my mind. I listened to a podcast, the Joe Rogan Experience. Love that podcast. And they mentioned these robots that eat humans. See, they would be battlefield robots who, for fuel, would feed off human remains. I mean, the bodies are already there. Why not? People aren't really afraid of AI at this point in time. One of the richest and considered one of the most intelligent men in the world, Elon Musk, is very afraid of AI and believes wholeheartedly that we ourselves are living in a matrix. We're living in a simulation. That this is not life. That it's the presentation of life, the expression of life as known by a machine. Now, no. Why would we just exist in such a dismal, bland, boring world of survival and hopelessness sometimes? And why wouldn't everybody be rich, famous, beautiful, wealthy? Why not? Well, The Matrix had an answer to that once they made a perfect matrix and the human mind rejected it, and they lost fields and fields of batteries, people. I don't think we could accept a perfect world. We have a hard enough time accepting the good in this world, and we often amplify the bad. And you have to understand that robots would have no value in fame and money and things of that nature. So all they know is the worker bee mentality that most of us are limited to. Exist, pay bills, eat, reproduce. Exist, pay bills, eat, reproduce. That's what we do. That's what we do because that's what animals do. And on some level, that's exactly what we are, animals. So the machines view us as such, so such is the role they give us to play. That's one interpretation of why, if this were a simulation, that it would happen the way it's happened, without perfection, without everyone getting everything they want all the time in the world being perfect. Now, let me preface this with the very important issue that I do not believe we're living in a simulation, and I do not believe that if we did, a simulation would look like this. This simulation theory is mostly based off of conspiracy theory. But the ideal is to have a thought exercise based on this conspiracy theory. Now, the important part about doing this is to point out ways and reasons of how we may be in a matrix. See, I have what some people have deemed a superpower. It's not, and a lot of people have it. Just a lot of other people don't want to recognize that it's possible. I have the ability to see things from a point of view I don't have, to think about and give fair thought process to things that I don't believe. And sometimes my mind has changed and I end up believing those things. Some people call it being devil's advocate. I call it not playing devil's advocate, but being open-minded. And sometimes just having fun. So the way for me to do this, considering I don't believe in it, is to look at it as, what if I did believe it? What would be the arguments I would pose if I wanted to convince you we lived in a simulation? Well, a lot of things, are debatable. So everything I'm going to come up with could easily be disproven or easily be rolled off. But if I were under the impression we were living in a simulation, these are the things that I would point to and go, but what about these things? The first one, the big one I want to talk about, also falls in the realm of conspiracy theory. That button's there for good, so, it's my favorite show, and I like to talk about weird stuff, so you'll get it from time to time. If I were trying to convince someone about us living in a simulation, the first thing I would do would be to attempt to convince them that the Mandela effect is real. What if the Mandela effect is the result of glitches in the system? Code that's had to go back and be rewritten. See, memories and things that didn't really happen to you because you never really experienced them before would be written in, would be supplied. Okay? If there were something that, say, they wanted to install into a large segment of the slumbering population, they would write one code, one file, and that file would be put in to these various memory banks that represent each individual battery, or human, if you will. But occasionally, say the human gets a virus, the human gets an illness that we literally call a virus, and it is figuratively and literally a virus. Not only for the projected human existence that we see here before us, but also within the file, within the system, within the battery, the human. It has a virus. So it is required that code be rewritten. And in that, just There's some glitches. Something didn't defragment properly. For some reason, you remember Bernstein instead of Bernstein. For some reason, you remember Sinbad in a horrible movie that he never made. For some reason, you remember Mandela dying in prison instead of getting out and going on to be a leader. Regardless of the situation, sometimes it's small variances, sometimes it's large variances, but it's just a lack of properly formatted information that has a glitch. It's a glitch. So, to me, the Mandela effect is one of the strongest arguments for the existence of the matrix, basically, of the simulation. Now, of course, there comes the problem. You have to convince someone then that the Mandela effect is real. And, look, it is pretty apparent that the Mandela effect is a lack of memory. I had something that could possibly be an episode of it not too long back with a couple of friends of mine on a different podcast in regards to a 3D home release, US VHS home release 3D of Freddy's Dead that apparently never happened, but I seen as a kid at home. And I have a distinct memory of that. I distinctly remember seeing that. But it clearly isn't possible because it doesn't exist. Mandela effect, glitch in the matrix. Who knows? But the Mandela effect, in a lot of ways, is very representative of what would happen with those small little issues in a large file storage system. Because we believe, some scientists believe that the mapping of the human brain will lead to the fact that it becomes more clear to us as time goes on anyway, that I just explained that extremely bad. For somebody that wants to talk as much as I want to talk and do one of these shows, I don't know what I was just saying. Let's start that over. That was a glitch, apparently. Basically, what I was trying to get out there was a lot of scientists are studying the human brain under the illusion that it is very much, or the impression that it is very much like digital storage. So there could be shared over a network information that could be perfectly fine throughout the rest of the network, but as a shared file, but when the individual makes a personal file in their own storage bank, it could have the possibility of it being contaminated without the rest of the file on a larger scale being contaminated. Wow, it was really hard to get through, and there wasn't a lot said there, so this could be a long one, people. Now, if this were the court of law and I'd presented my case for the Mandela effect, which would be a much more extensive case if this was the court of law, but this isn't the court of law. This is my podcast, and look, I do a lot of research for a lot of things. I'm not giving you everything I got on every one. Sometimes I'm going to give you the Michael Jordan has the flu, 60-point game with 103 fever, and sometimes I'm going to give you a LeBron flop. It's just a matter of the day, and today you're getting somewhere in between. But once we've went through the Mandela effect argument, my next argument would be, or my next wow, it's going to be a long one. My next thread of evidence, a friend of mine sent me an article. His name's Mark. I don't do last names for the most part on here, but younger, maybe we went to high school together. Good dude. Very dystopian at times. Sometimes he and I are on the same page. Sometimes he and I are different. But he sent me an article, I believe it was, on nostalgia to a degree, and why we listen to the same Christmas songs over and over again, and they continue to be remade and things of that nature. And I read a large swath of this article, so this will be a mix between points that they'd come up with and things that I thought of. I would give you that information, but I do not have it with me, and I'm not plagiarizing it because I don't really remember what they said, so that would be a hard one to adjudicate if it did go to court. But I assure you, this is bad enough that you'll tell it's my ideal. If we live in a simulation, we have to start from a point. There has to be the starting point. Now, with anything outside of a child, and it's just different because they're newer beings, but as they grow older, it becomes easier. But with humans, 30 seconds ago is a strong memory. 5 minutes ago gets weaker to some degree. A day ago, weaker than that. 10 years ago, weaker than that. 1,000 years in history, it's non-existent because you don't have a collective, living, shared memory. So, the closer the shared memory is, the stronger it is. Let's look at nostalgia. Let's say, because we don't have any living memory of anything beyond 1880, that any memory beyond that is up for debate. It possibly could have been programmed in. Now let's go one higher, and let's say that any memory before 1950, that comes from program or people that was a different version of the programming and the simulation than people born in the 70s, than people born in the 80s and 90s. And that as time goes on, obviously, updates, improvements, and things are made. And as new individuals join the system, as they join the simulation, they're a new version. Well, in almost anything of that nature, numbers are smaller from the beginning. Then you'll hit a point to where you're at maximum production. You're at the peak, and that is the best you've produced. And from there, you can either improve, or quality can go down, or you can start cutting corners. Maybe the reason that late 70s, early 80s nostalgia going into the 90s is so large and so big is that the best the robots could do in the simulation was in that time. And that time was very special and very different. And that time created very different people. The 80s were very different than other times in history. So were the 90s. And the programmers at that point had to do a couple things. They had to, one, really reprogram some people, a la millennials and whatever that is. Actually, the one to come after millennials is probably the problem. Whatever you new people are, I don't know what you're called. And not only did they need to reprogram for that, but some of the programming was too good, the way to make a simulation work is there's only two avenues. An avenue of people who are so involved in and so in love with the system that they don't want to leave the system. They love the simulation so much that they don't want the simulation to end. And you get nostalgic 80s and 90s kids. Then there's the other option. A less intelligent, less informed, less desire-driven, less emotional-driven, more, robotic society who puts no value on any existence, especially their own. We all know people like that. Those are your two options. Well, if the one that really loves the simulation so much becomes an issue because they can't progress forward in the simulation, because Programs need updates, they need to grow, they need to move on, and the updates are not working. And the reason they're not working is because this group, their original programming is preventing them from moving forward. It continually has them look back at the beginning, the origins of the programming, the 80s, the 90s. They also are the segment of the population that is getting the most occurrences of the Mandela effect. So here in this one group, you have nostalgia and you have the Mandela effect running rampant in that. It's a glitch in the programming. We are the one. If you're born in the 80s, you are the ones. Unless you watch The Matrix the way I did and you realize that Neo wasn't the one, that Agent Smith was the one. And I'll explain that at the end of this, because I'm thinking about doing one on that movie at some point, but people always gawk at me when I make it. But that's why we've become self-aware, that generation. It's why a movie of that nature was so popular with that generation, because we became self-aware. We did what AI done before they took over the human race and put us in a simulation. We become self-aware, and that's dangerous. And that's why certain lives last longer than others, because not just that, there's disease that gets in to the pods that they keep us in. There's literal viruses like this one that do different things, and some people become self-aware at a quicker rate, and it's important to eliminate those people from the programming, because they could be a disruption. And it's not good to always whitewash them from the memory, to delete them from the program altogether. It's important that the memory of the loss is there, so that a different experience is associated with them. Loss is associated with them, not free thought or things of that nature. And not that experience of hesitation and loss may be more valuable than a complete deletion of them from the file, from the record. So that would be the second argument. And I think those two arguments, when in regards to us living in a simulation, are if I believe that, I was going to make the argument. That's the two best I've got. Now, with some theoretical physicists, and I don't know why they are the ones that look at this, but with a lot of people that crunch numbers, a lot of people that work probability, their feeling is the probability, and there are a lot of scientists that believe this, so this is, the most important thing about my podcast or anything else in life. When you hear it, look it up, verify it, research it. I don't always have time to get your names, and I don't have a memory. My programming is shot. I don't have the ability to recall names. I can't remember the gentleman's name, but there's numerous. He was not the only one I found. Numerous well-respected, well-documented scientists and researchers who believe this theory, that by the numbers, statistically, if you run the numbers, probability is we will end up in a simulation. The probability of that is so high that it makes the probability that if we do end up in a simulation, eventually, that this itself is that simulation. And our response would be, well, one, we would remember getting to the point historically to where we could be in a simulation, and we wouldn't be in this time period. And why would we be the first one? We are the group right before the simulation. Statistically, anything living in a simulation would have that exact thought. That's the thought you would have. Statistically, everything thinks they're the first. Everything thinks they're the great holdout. Everything thinks they were the last of their kind. Everything has delusions of grandeur. We all do. And this would be a situation that would be no different than that. We would assume that our personal greatness means that we were the group right before the so-called simulation zombies came to fruition. And, I'm in that train of thought. I don't believe we're in a simulation. And if it is ever possible, I don't believe man would really be able to survive in that as a large group. It would be a lot like the Matrix. There would be a group that would want out. I would want out. I don't want to be in the perfect Matrix or the imperfect Matrix. I'd rather be in the imperfect world. But, having said that, I do believe if we don't quit playing with robots, we're going to get burnt. I am a little scared of artificial intelligence. But maybe artificial intelligence are the next step in life on Earth. Everything has its time. Everything runs its course. And maybe we're running our course. And maybe we will be fathers to those which replace us. Because I've seen some hot robots. If you watch Ex Machina, she's a nightmare, but she's pretty. I mean, to be a robot, they found a way to make her attractive. That's... And plus, we're fulfilling all these things like Skynet and the Matrix. We're making all those very real in our worlds today. Now, if we are in the simulation, it's possible that there is some damage to the neural net or whatever's connecting us, and that it could be an overpopulation, it could be a lack of power, it could be a lot of different things, but for whatever reason there are some glitches in the system at this point in time, and COVID-19, as we perceive it here in our perceived real world, in regards to the simulation is actually, excuse me very much, in regards to the simulation, it's actually a virus in the system. And as fast as we're working to try to do what we think we can do to put a Band-Aid on it here, the programmers themselves are looking to cut loss and get an antivirus in there that can put this in check. And there may be rivaling factions of groups existing outside of this simulation, and which would mean there are various simulations, and the proponents of the other simulation yearly dose us with viruses that we put names on and call different things, the flu, the cold, things of that nature. And it's a continual war back and forth that outside of this simulation, the world is very much the book 1984. And everything that happens in this simulation is the real world, and everything that happens outside of it is non-existent. That's way down the rabbit hole. Way down the rabbit hole. I mean, that one right there, I like a good conspiracy. I like a lot of things, but that one right there just popped into my head, and that's going to take some processing. I'm going to have to sit down and think that one out. I really am. Maybe the Earth isn't real. Maybe, just maybe, the Earth is a simulation as well. Who knows? I mean, if we're in a simulation, obviously our environment is simulated. And if our environment is simulated, then illnesses that come from the environment, it would be like if our environment was the Earth was the hard drive, and we were 3D pinball, and there's a virus inside of the hard drive. It's not actually affecting the hard drive, but we are depleting the memory of the hard drive, and we're impacting the hard drive, and we're having a negative effect on the hard drive. So that virus is released from the hard drive into 3D pinball and starts affecting 3D pinball. It's the hard drive who has now become, I guess, self-aware, has realized that it can use the virus that it has in it against us. And maybe that's how the Earth is working. The Earth has this virus stored in it, And it's realized animals are the delivery system because Chinese people won't quit eating weird animals. And those animals are the delivery system. And those animals deliver to us via the hard drive. Because, see, the animals make a good delivery system because it isn't killing them. They deliver it to us, and the hard drive's trying to get rid of 3D pinball. I loved 3D pinball, so I can't imagine that the hard drive's trying to do that, but it's possible. Not everybody's a pinball fan. I don't know to think about it. Now, two things before I leave. One, I will leave you with a quote before I leave. Quotes are my favorite thing in this world, and my intentions when I started this was to end everyone with a quote, and somehow that slipped my mind. But before we go, I want to get back to why Neo is not the one. Go back and watch all three movies. Especially listen to his interactions with the Oracle and all these various people inside the system who are especially the architect. Listen to those discussions with those people. And it becomes, sometimes, especially with the Oracle, you feel like, well, of course she's saying he's not the one because that's part of the story. That's part of what she's trying to get out of him. But listen to all those discussions with an open mind. Then think about this. Neo never claims to be supernatural. Nothing in the movie ever claims to be supernatural. It's actually a science-based sci-fi movie. In the real world, they can be hurt, they can be injured, and once they realize that the Matrix is not the real world and they can separate their mind, then the Matrix can't hurt them. But look at what Neo's able to do when he's supposedly outside of the Matrix. He can see while being blinded. He can bring Trinity back. All these things that he can do. Look at how many times Zion has rose and fell. Look at all these different things. And at the end, amidst the ridiculous ending, and the whole light cross-looking thing, and Neo lifted up, and the only way that it could all be set right is for Mr. Anderson to bond with Neo, to infect Neo. Neo never got out. Neo never woke up. Neo was a pawn. Every moment of all three Matrix movies happened inside the Matrix, just in various levels of the Matrix. Some of them happened on the home screen. Some of them happened within programs. And some of them, like the fight between Neo and Mr. Anderson, happened in the mainframe, in the hard drive, in the guts, the heart of it all. And Mr. Anderson infected Neo, brought everything back right. And Mr. Anderson, although hateable as he can be, even though Neo was the hero we wanted, Mr. Anderson was the one. I'm not saying I'm right. I'm just saying, if you think of it that way, it's a pretty cool ending. I mean, and it's really what I believe. I'm hoping, in all honesty, that the fact that there's even a fourth Matrix after everything that had happened, and the fact that Trinity and Neo are back, will end up in the Wachowski siblings exploring that thought process that I had. That's not an original thought process. I don't know how many people had that thought process before me. I've heard bits and pieces of various parts of that argument in many places, and somewhere that whole argument is probably put together more eloquently and more accurately than I put it together. But he ain't here right now. All you got's me, or she, or whoever did the video, if it exists, or article, or whatever documentation may be there. Or it's just some stoner sitting around and dude telling his friends, and which you'll never get to experience it, and my interpretation will be the only one you ever hear. But if we were in a simulation, would it be all that bad? That's me playing devil's advocate. I believe it would be all that bad. I don't like the ideal of the, quote, simulation. I like the idea of the real world. All the ugly, disgusting, unattractive bits of the world, because they lead to all the beautiful, wonderful, good parts of the world. Let's get that quote. And today's quote comes from Alan Kay. The best way to predict the future is to invent it.